burden. You had sometimes things become overwhelming and stressful. We can have things that, because of finances, they bring fears into our life that we're not sure how we're going to deal with things. Of course, with the coronavirus and the health issues can come up, and we don't know what the day may bring forth or what may happen in our lives. Surely my life has really changed after the medical situation I had a month ago. And so we have all these things come up. Relationships can bring us to situations that we're just lost. Have you ever been just lost of what to do next? And you sometimes call out to God for wisdom and wondering, speak loud. Sometimes I said, Lord, speak loud, for thy servant is deaf. And so sometimes that happens to us, and we just don't have direction or where we need to go. And so I've had just several challenging things in my life, even in the last month. One of them is just traffic, just driving here to church. And I had a heart attack a month ago, and so I just noticed sometimes I can't take it, and and it's all the other crazy drivers. It's not this crazy driver; it's all those other guys on the road. Why don't they get their own road? So sometimes things. The other thing that really bothers me right now is things not getting done. You always want to have things done, right? I'm not that compulsive, but you always would like to have something done that you wanted to have done and expected to have done, and then it doesn't get done, and it's irritating. And so that becomes an issue, and the question becomes for all of us, how will we respond to it? Do we go to pieces? Can we lose sleep over it? I'm sure we've all done that. Do we, kind of just fall apart? And so the question is, how will we respond to it? And how much of a load can we carry? Life has a way of serving up problems sometimes that you feel like you can't handle. But we have some scripture that's really important. Philippians 4:13. I think I have that for us, right? Yeah. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. We believe the Bible. Do you believe that verse? Yes. We say we believe the whole Bible. Well, this is there. And God is in us, and through Christ we can do all things. Amen. Matter of fact, there's a verse in 1 Corinthians 10:13 that refers mainly just to sin, but look at, no temptation has taken you except as is human, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but will with the temptation make a way of escape that you are able to bear it. So there's sometimes we say, man, the devil made me do it. Flip Wilson, if anybody goes back that far. There's just those times that we are sorely tempted, and sometimes tempted to worry and fret and lose it. Have you ever lost it? We get so angry we can't even imagine the next day how that happened or why we did, or we think of it a week later, some event that took place, and we don't know. Why did we respond this way? But here's a text that I feel God led me in the beginning of the week. And you know it probably well, but it's Matthew chapter 11, and we're in verses 28 through 30. And let's just read through that, and we'll go back to verse 28. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Let's go back to verse 11. Verse 28. Chapter 11, verse 28. Weary. Let me explain a couple words before I get to the hows. How does Jesus say we deal with this thing? The word for worry is kapiao, and it means, it's in the original language, and what it means is you have labored. This is a word for labored. It's such a heavy burden and laboring so hard that you're basically exhausted. Matter of fact, I think the word exhausted could be a real good translation for this word. And so it says, come to me when you're exhausted. I remember in the building of this building, we came to a day where we were pouring. We didn't have enough guys. It was some concrete work, and we didn't have enough guys to finish. And we had people who had to go off to work and things, and we were still in the middle of it, and there was 2 of us left. And we worked so hard that when we got done, we just both fell on the ground and just didn't move for like a half hour. We just were dead. Have you ever been that tired? If you ever get that, you go to bed at night and you get that sleepless leg syndrome. Right. And you just, no matter where you put your legs or your body, you're sore and ouch, and it happens. Well, that's what this word means. It's the idea of really being totally weary. And then there's another word here, heavy laden. And it's the load you're carrying is so great. I've known people, and I've prayed for them sometimes, that I just can't imagine how great of a load they are carrying. I've prayed for them that God bear them up, hold them up, and give them strength. It's just, I know some people, and I've said, God, why? I'm sure they were asking why it was all this, but I was asking why too. Why does some one person have to carry such a big load? This word is used to stock a ship. When a ship's ready to travel from one area to another in the time of the Bible days, they would load it up with cargo. And so, and the ship, as they loaded it up, would get heavier and heavier, and it sinks in the water. And so this is the word to be heavy laden. And then there's another time they used it. You see pictures sometime on something like National Geographic or something, where somebody is just loaded up they're carrying something on their back, and it almost looks funny. See this person carrying all these sticks on their back, or an animal like a camel. And they load it down so much that you say, how can they bear the weight? And that's what this word is. So Jesus is telling you, when you come to those times in your life, and listen, every one of us will have it. Students have it sometimes when finals are coming. Term papers are due. Jobs have it when you have a deadline and you have to get things done, and you look at it and say, it's impossible. But with God, all things are possible. And God can extend that time for you, or God can give you relief. God can give you assistance or help when you never thought it was possible. But that's what these words mean. And even in 1 Peter 5:7, I'm not sure if I gave that to you, did I? Yeah, casting all your care or anxiety on him because he cares for you. This is where we learn to start casting it on, giving it to God. See, the question is, when you're so overwhelmed and you've told God for days and days, it's getting worse, and then God, you wonder why God doesn't answer. But here, there's an answer, and just keep waiting on the Lord. Remember Isaiah 40:31, it says, that we wait, they that wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings as eagles. They will run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. And so we won't faint if we are trusting and resting on God. But sometimes when we rest on ourselves, we will. And where are you at when those events come into your life? And so where we need to be is we need to be trusting in God and not in ourselves. And we aren't like that phrase with the camel, the straw that broke the camel's back. You feel like sometimes people are already adding onto it. I think of mom sometimes, where everybody in the family adds one more thing on her. You know, the dishes, and Mary gets done sometimes with dishes up at the house, and then she finds a cup over here and a plate. And Michaela, don't tell her I told you this. Okay, she has a way of stashing dirty plates in her bedroom. And Mary will go in there. Now, you promise not to tell. And she will just stash some things over there, and she'll go in there, and mom will say, how did you get such a big pile in here? And laundry and that, it all adds up. Well, the question is then, how do we put all this on God? How do we give it to God is the question. Because we're going to get there. You're going to have a time legally, financially, health-wise. You're going to have a time with relationships, with work, where it gets such a burden that you just don't know how you can make it through, how you can get through the next day. Well, Jesus does give us an answer in these 3 verses here. And let me tell you, there's 3 things he tells us to do, and in these, they're all imperative mode. Now, for those who don't understand what that is, again, let me explain it real quick. Every verb in the New Testament has mode, and the mode tells you the degree of certainty or the degree of doubt. One of the 4 modes is a command, and there's 3 commands in this text. So when you read this, it's not just a suggestion. It is actually Jesus speaking, and he's telling you God will be there for you, but there's 3 steps you need to take. And it's really cool. The first one is in verse 28. It's imperative mode when he says, come to me. So that's the issue, is you come to Christ. When you have that problem, you don't, the question would be, is who do you look to or what do you look to? Some people, when they're overloaded, and they've been in the world and that, what do they look to? They look to a drink. They look to a smoke. They're stressed and they look to, some have just go back to drugs, or they take drugs and it takes away for a moment the problem they have. And sometimes we look to friends. We can look to family. As children, we look to mom and dad, and we run from things sometimes. But this is telling us who we need to look to, is we need to look to Christ. He says, come to me. Come to me. Be like a child in the text. I like the text in Matthew chapter 18. It's really applicable to so many things in our life. But he says, be like a child. Come to me humbly and be converted. Have the faith of a child. Just think, he says it several times, but that text, and just start in Matthew 18, and it will be a blessing for you. But sometimes that's what we need to do. We need to lay aside pride and lay aside our own strengths, and we need to rest in his. My granddaughter, little Abby, she had a problem yesterday, and her problem was Elena. I still get you 2 mixed up, although you're, a few years older than her. But Elena broke Abby's necklace. And it had just been given her that morning, a late birthday present. And so she was a little fretting about it, and she brought it to Grandpa to see if Grandpa could fix it. Well, it was an easy fix. And when it got done, and I just gave it to her, she just great. And she quick put it on and walked away prancing. It would be nice if life was so easy. But as children, we bring it to mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or someone trusted. And as Christians, though, we need more quickly to learn to run to Christ. Amen. And sometimes if we're not careful, we carry this load for quite a long time, and then we all of a sudden think, maybe I better start running to Christ. The old statement, run to the cross. Run to the cross, because that's who took care of us and paid the price for us. So Learn to run to God. He said, come to me. And so that's what we should do, is we should come to Christ. I have found one way to do that, and we're talking about the how do you come to Christ. One way we do that is, of course, we pray. And I think when things are serious for us, sometimes we maybe do a better job, or we finally come to that point where we realize our need for God. Maybe we don't quite understand our dependence for God and some other things in that, but when we're really burdened, we might really learn to pray then. And when you pray, and sometimes there's a statement we've used that you pray through. And that you know you've completely prayed about this, You know that you've brought this to God. And I've had times, as I've shared with you many of those times, where I've prayed and I knew God told me right then He was going to answer it. And that it was all fine. It was all taken care of. And so it was now it's the time just to thank God, and you just thank Him for it. But looking at that verse again, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden. You're so stressed out, you're so exhausted, and you've had so many things placed on you that's heavy. And what does He say? And I will give you rest. There's the promise. Sometimes we tell you when you read your Bibles, you look for the commands, you look for principles, and then you look for promises. And this is a promise. So God says, and He promises you, He'll give you rest. And you need rest because you've been at odds with yourself inside. You've come to the point inside that you're so weary, but you're exhausted, but you can't sleep, or you can't think about anything else. You've been there, right? You know what I'm talking about. When something really bothers you, that's where you're at. So what do? Is you give it to God. You come to Jesus, and He can take care of it. And we just need to learn this. One of the simplest truths in the Bible is have faith in God. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not into your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path. So we should learn to do that. Here's a promise. The second one is found in verse 29. Let's look at verse 29. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. First of all, take my yoke upon you. Now, what's a yoke? A yoke is that thing, you've seen them on animals of burden, pulling a plow. And it's a wood. It was at that time, it was a wooden structure, right? And they put it around one animal on one side and one around the other side. And they were supposed to pull together as a team. The object is to harness the power of two of these beasts of burden and harness the power of two of them together that could pull more easily so they would not wear out. And so that you could work with them. And so that was to come together, be bound together is the idea. And you do that as a means to get through some difficult things. And most probably here, what it's referencing, look at it, it says, take my yoke upon you. So the question is this: who are you yoked to? If you're in the yoke and you've bound yourself to this yoke, here's the question: who's on the other side of that yoke? And in this case, who's on the other side is who? Jesus. Take my yoke. It's His. And He's there, and you're to be bound with Him. And see, that'll get you through the days, the weeks, the years, that it's a struggle. And sometimes, I'm sorry to say, some of those struggles have lasted for years. A long time. And so, when you're bound here, you're bound to Christ. And the question is, who have you bound yourself to? Who's on the other end of your yoke? As a child, again, we can say we were yoked to our parents. We trusted in them. We looked to them for everything. And then as we grew older and we go to school, we start trusting in teachers and friends. Friends become a huge issue in our life. And then when friends fail us and teachers sometimes, we struggle. Who do we turn to then? In my life, there were my coaches. And some people who, I respected greatly in life. But there comes that time as we grow now and as we mature in Christ that we need to realize the one we should run to first and the one who we should be yoked to is Christ. Amen. That's the one we're bound to at the hip, they say, right? Bound to it by the hip. And so there we come to Christ and we trust in Him. Depending on the situation, we might run to other things. But we need to learn in all things, the first thing we do is yoke ourselves to God and His solutions. See, sometimes the world's solution is really different. Have you gone to some people in the world, they can give you just all these strange ideas or tell you to get back? I've known people that have problems with relationships and they get all this advice. Well, just, get back at them, right? That's not what God says, to get back at them. Give it to God and let vengeance be His, right? A lot of times we're the ones who want to retaliate. We have a situation where we've been hurt, situation where we're struggling in, and we want to get even. We want to get ahead. We want to give them a piece of our mind. Don't do that. You don't have much there, So make sure that we're careful there and follow what Christ says. Treat them with, you're still supposed to treat them, even your enemies. In Romans chapter 12, 17 to 21, one of the greatest texts we can use in our lives on this, it says, when your enemy's hungry, give him what? Food. Don't say, I told you you would come to me one of these days. We like to say that. I told you so's. But when he's hungry, you give him food. When he's thirsty, you give him water to drink. And so, by the way, you don't give him a beer or a shot of whiskey. But it says, give him water to drink. And in so doing, you'll heap burning coals upon his head. So yoke yourself to God and His solutions. And once again, you're praying and you're just making sure when you get through some of these problems, or go through some of these events in your life, that you don't choose the solution of the world. Right. That you yoke yourself to Christ and His teachings. Right. See, the world will say, okay, we have a problem with finances. And the world will tell you sometimes, well, go out and get another loan. Go out and put your, refinance everything and do this and that. And sometimes it just becomes an easy solution to put yourself in greater debt or greater problem. We look to institutions. We look to solving it, getting, other things and selling and getting another job and getting a second job. And we look to all these things in a panic. And we panic about this. Now, I know that God gives you and me a path. And sometimes that might be His path for your life. But you need to make sure that's what it is then. And don't run to it and don't panic over life's events and be turning to it and looking for the world solution of borrowing money or go to the government for help or have some big money scheme and that where you can make it on. Instead, learn to run to God and see what God's solution is for you. And see what God opens doors. Ask and you shall be given. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be open unto you. Luke chapter 11. So we need to follow that. And we don't ask God enough and we don't wait. Wait upon the Lord. And renew your strength. You're weak. You're weary. So wait and let God provide you. Have you ever jumped out ahead of God? Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I got two good people here. Thank you. Yeah, so have I. And then afterwards, you wish, oh gosh, I wish I'd waited. This is perfect now. Right. Here was the solution. So we need to wait upon the Lord, and we need to trust in Him. And so He says, take my yoke upon you. So yoke yourself to Christ. And as you go through this, what does he say again? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you shall find rest. There it is again. You shall find rest for your souls. Well, 1 and 2 was, first of all, come to Christ. The second one was to take his yoke. The third one is actually to learn. He says, learn from me, right? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. So we need to learn from him. What does he say we need to learn? First of all, learn that he's gentle. Gentle and humble. What does humble mean again? To be low. Okay, when it says again, I use this all the time because humble is translated, that word tapainos, that's the original word, is to translate it to either be lowly or to be humble. Either way. So one of the texts that you all know is when Jesus rode on the donkey, he said he was lowly on the donkey. And that showed that he was not proud. He wasn't entering Jerusalem, this proud conqueror, this proud king. But he was coming in, showing you that he was humble. And the word for gentle here is, again, the word to be non-assertive, non-pushy. And sometimes when we get in trouble and we're struggling, we get pushy. We push on others to help us. We make demands of people. And we make demands of things. I knew this lady, she told me this story. And she was so proud of how she solved it. And she had a problem. She had gotten in a fender bender. She had gotten in a little car wreck. And the insurance company was not going to honor the full, requirements, really, what they should have done. So she went down to the office, and she took her 3 darling little cherubs, young girls, very young children. And they weren't so much cherubs, they were more of the little demons type cherubs. And she went in there, and she had this planned. She went in there, and she asked for her agent, and the agent came out and was not going to give her the full amount to take care of the car. And so she sat there. She says, I'm not leaving until you do. He said, well, fine, you can stay as long as you want to. But, well, guess what happened? Those kids, they started running around. They got into all the magazines, and they were everywhere. And they were getting on the chairs and jumping off and playing tag and bothering everybody until the guy came out and says, okay, already. Okay. Just please, lady, leave with your children. And we have a way of might makes right. And be lean and mean. Have you ever heard that one? Be lean and mean? Well, there's another one for Christians. Be sleek and meek. Amen. And so that's what God calls us to do. He says, learn from me. And what are we supposed to learn from him? That he's gentle. That he's, that he's humble. We need to learn that he's kind. And so if we do that, if we will learn that he's gentle, humble in heart, you shall have rest for your souls. Because, see, he uses the word here, and sometimes the word soul, I think, is not translated good. Here, I think it's a real good translation, the way they did it. Because the word soul is not just your life, and that's the way soul is translated sometimes, by the way. It's just translated life, shouldn't be. The word soul, though, is your innermost being. It's the non-material, non-physical part of your body. It's that soul. It's being, when you're grieved deep inside, that's your soul that's grieving. When you've been hurt deep inside, that's that soul. And so he says, the only way you're going to get real rest is inside is to become and yoke to God, Jesus, and to learn from him and learn that that's his path that he wants for us, is to be meek and not mean, not aggressive, not pushy, and to trust in him then in this thing. And so we kind of start looking for what's the right way and how should we respond to this, and then we will for sure find peace and rest in our souls. And so verse 30 says, for my yoke is easy and my load is light. Compared to this world, his way is lighter. You know that when you carry a burden of sin on you. We've all had that. And when you get that burden off your back and you've confessed it and gotten it right, that load that you now bear is nothing, right? Because Jesus has borne it for you. And as a Christian, we are all sinners. Not just the world, but we are. A lot of times we like to point the finger to the world and say, well, you know, they're sinners. No, we are too. And sometimes we get that and we carry it, and sometimes we don't get right in it. And when we finally come to that point where we give it to God and get right, that's where our load is light again. And so that's one way of how we find it, by coming to God. And it says this again, for my yoke is easy and my load is light. The word light means lightweight. Literally, like it says, light. It's a lightweight. Have you ever heard somebody say you're a lightweight? Yes. And so, you might have thought you were pretty big, but somebody says, oh, you're just a lightweight. And the loads of this world, compared to the loads of this world, what he gives us, he releases that. This word for easy, the better translation I like for it, if you study it out, you'll find that it's probably best translated, I think, the word useful. Because it says his yoke is going to be useful to you. And it appears in Corinthians and a couple places and that, so you'll find that God's yoke is going to be great for you. We think of a yoke and we think of this coming to Christ sometimes of maybe being almost enslaved. But when you come to Christ, that's where you really get your freedom. I mean, just think, people think of the reasons people don't come to Christ and finally say, okay, I'm done with trying to do everything my way, and I'm ready to have your way. Because we're afraid of God's way. We're afraid it's a hard path. Oh, you have to love people, and I don't want to love that person. Oh, you have to forgive, and I'm never going to forgive that person. I've heard this many times. And so we think coming to Christ is a scary thing, and yet it's the best thing for us in our life. Who loved us more than Christ? Who was a greater hero in this world than Jesus Christ, who died for the sins of this world? There's been others who have died for someone or died for a group of people or something, but Jesus died for the sins or the faults of the world. Not his faults, ours. And so he's the greatest hero that has ever lived. And we have to be content in his path that he gives us to get this thing right. And when you look at this load the world carries and the load that God gives to us, his plan is always perfect. I had a call from a guy in our church years ago. And he was working, he was in the military, and he was assigned duty this one night to guard the officer's bar. And as a Christian, it was offensive just to start with. But he did it. It was his job and duty. And so he went there and he started. And as the night wore on, these officers went in and they were coming out with women and they were coming out drunk. And some of them just, stupid drunk, slobbery drunk. And you know what I'm talking about. And it was just bothering him. And it bothered him to the point that he called me up. And he said, Pastor, I'm going to leave my post. I can't stand this anymore. They're asking me to do something that as a Christian I cannot do. What do you think I should do? And man, at those moments in a pastor's life, it's very almost frightening. Because you look at it and says, this guy is going to take my advice. And, and I found out, by the way, sometimes it's used against you. Well, Pastor, you told me to do this. So, that's a scary moment too. But God gave me a text that was so great. In 2 Kings chapter 5, there's a great text on this. Remember Naaman? He had been an officer for the king of a foreign country. And he had leprosy. And they started talking, people would say, oh, we wish he could be cured of his leprosy. Well, there wasn't a cure at that time for leprosy. There is now, by the way, but there wasn't then. And so they said this little girl that was a slave from the Israelites, she said, well, there's a great prophet in Israel that can cure you. And so the king heard that, so he mounted Naaman up with all the wealth and all the silver and all the special things, and they went down to find the king in Israel, and then the king says, oh my goodness, I can't cure leprosy, and I don't know who you're talking about. So they finally send him to the prophet. And so Naaman shows up, and what did the prophet say? Do you remember? Wash yourself 7 times. You get this? Wash yourself 7. Now this is the path that God will give you. Well, Naaman heard that, and he got ticked. It says he was furious, and he left in a rage. He said, why should I wash myself 7 times in Jordan? That's a dirty river compared to some of our clean rivers. So why should I do that? And he was just angry. And some of his servants came up with the courage and said, sir, how much more reasonable is it to wash and be clean? And he said, well, I was expecting him to wave his hands over me and some cute little phrase. And he said, so I expected that. Something fantastic. He said, no, how much different? Wash and be clean. And so he thought about it. And this is a real important point, because that's where you either surrender to God or you keep fighting it because you didn't like the path. That's where you finally listen to God. To hear this guy, Naaman, listens, and he goes to the Jordan, and when he came out of the water the 7th time, it says his skin was healed, and it was soft like a baby skin. When's the last time you felt baby skin? Wow. Yesterday, yeah. Mine was yesterday too. Little Abby, she just turned 4. She was showing me, she's so proud of her big stomach. I don't think she's going to be proud of it down the road. Pastor, look how big I'm getting. Or Grandpa, look how big I'm getting, And she pulled her, she just pulls her up. Show and tell. And so she wanted me to touch it, so I said, oh, man. And I realized how soft, and that's what made me think of this text. So soft, and he was healed. And this is the point I wanted to share as we close. He said, and this is what I was sharing with the guy. He said, can I take some dirt with me from Israel? I want to take a bunch of dirt with me, and I want to put it down, and because I'm going to start worshiping God. So he converted to Yahweh. And he said, can I take that? And he says, and one more thing. He says, when my king asked me to bow to his god, Rimmon, and he asked me to bow to him, and he pulls me and tugs at me and says, I want you to kneel down with me. Have your God, will your God hold that against me? And Elijah said, go in peace. Go in peace. But because he knew his heart, and he knew he wanted to worship Yahweh, but he's being forced by the king, and so it would be on the king. When I shared that with the man who was in the military, he told me, good answer. And so he stayed at his post. You have to be able to receive God's answer. And God will give you a path. Always look, and I pray, when I pray for not only myself but others, many times I just pray, God, give them a path that they can see that's your path for healing. Your path for blessing. Your path to get through this financial issue. Your path for them to deal with these relationships. And God can give that to you, and it might be different. It might not be what you expected. See, he did not want to stay at that bar and guarding drunks. He did not. He said, this is terrible that I as a Christian have to do this. Yeah, well, it was his duty, and God will not hold it against you. Right. And so by the authority of the Word of God, come to Jesus. Right. Who do you come to? Yoke yourself to Jesus, because his yoke is easy. It's gentle. It's humble. And learn from him. And we're going to find rest. We can find peace. As long as we carry it by ourselves, these burdens will be too much for us. And you're going to have them. You will have them this year. We might have them with this coronavirus. I don't know. But we will find peace with him. Amen. With God, it will work out. Right. Let's pray. Heads bowed and just eyes closed. Hearts open before God. Maybe right